hopefully you can see this more or less. It's just a very brief question, just 1 minute or 2 minutes. So here we have a task. You don't need to do the task. Basically, they're just matching the questions with the answers. It's a vocabulary task. We look at the key words in bold. So just with the person next to you, from what we were discussing yesterday about teaching lexically and a kind of more lexical approach to language, how might this fit with that? How might that task fit? As a teacher, how might you check the language in bold? We'll be looking at this in the session. And then how might you practice it? The way I think about it, meeting with a kind of lexical approach, is more kind of thinking about the outcome first and planning backwards. So, you know, if we want to talk about our studies, courses we've done, these are kinds of questions you might ask, and then thinking about the typical replies. We're not kind of simply focused on grammar or words as individual things, but seeing how the phrases work together, and then exploring the words within these contexts, okay? So that would be how I would see it as teaching lexically. I was thinking today we could imagine teaching language for talking about how you find the conference. What language would you need for that? What kind of questions would you ask? What we're going to look at now is basically the idea of checking this language. So one way we might check and practice is simply asking our students to have similar conversations about their experiences of doing courses, okay? And some of this language would be recycled. It was mentioned at the front here, concept checking questions, and we'll be looking at these in a moment. So let's just kind of think about this. I actually started the idea for this kind of talk. I saw a conference speech by a guy called Sugata Mitra. I don't know if anybody's seen his TED talk. He basically put computers in Indian villages, and supposedly the students taught themselves. And so he's taken this a step further. He has this idea of, I think they're called SOL, self-organizing learning environments. And his basic premise was, we don't need teachers anymore. What we need is the internet and good questions. Now, personally, I didn't agree with him. I think we still need teachers, and we have an important role to play. But it did make me think about what was a good question. What are good questions in an English language classroom? Okay? So, very first thing, why do you ask questions in the English language classroom? Again, just with the person next to you, how many different reasons can you think of? Very, very quickly. See if any of these were the same. Instruction checking questions, concept checking questions, comprehension questions. Anybody have anything different? To get feedback? Yes, okay, so I mean, yes, maybe, yes. Elicitation. Clarify information. Okay, I would kind of think of this as maybe as concept checking and comprehension, but yes, clarifying information. Okay, there may be some other ones you've thought of. So, why is this is not a new actual, if you look in literature, there's a kind of history of thinking about questions in the classroom, and they've often, in the very kind of typical way of academics, they give a new name for these things, and they often divide them into the idea between display questions and referential questions. For our purpose, we could have the first one. It's the kind of, what's the past of go? Well done, okay? What's the past of teach? Excellent, well done. So we have this kind of the teacher asks a question, they initiate, the students respond, and the teacher gives this kind of well done kind of evaluation. Okay? The point being that the teacher knows the answers. So they're just asking for the students to display their knowledge, or lack of knowledge, if you like. And then the other one would be referential questions. This I would just say as a normal question, a question where you basically don't know the answer for certain. Okay? So, if we just have a very, again, just with the person next to you, which ones would you say are display? Which ones are referential or genuine questions? See if you agree. Broadly speaking, the first lot I would say are display, and the second lot are referential. I say student questions are referential. Sometimes I think teachers treat, when students ask you a question, I think sometimes teachers treat it as though the student knows the answer and they're just trying to trick us and test us. But I actually think most of the time they really want to know. And so our first duty is to be answering students' questions and encouraging their questions and to answer them. I know there's kind of, sometimes we have this thing where you go, well, what do you think? Or something like this, why don't you look it up in a dictionary? And I always think if I was traveling around centre of Kyiv, and I asked for, so which is the way to the cathedral? If somebody replied, well, what do you think? or perhaps, why don't you use Google Maps? I would be somewhat frustrated with this response, and I think students might feel the same way. So, always try and answer the students' questions. What we're going to look at is basically the idea of these concept checking in this first part, and to a lesser extent the practice one. Because I think there may be ways that we could make concept checking questions, particularly with regard to vocabulary, as more something in between these kind of genuine and display. Okay? Later on, we're also doing a little bit on reading, so we'll be revisiting the idea of comprehension questions. And again, maybe there's something we can make them a little bit more open, would be the question. Why is that important? Okay. The first person who did the kind of studies of these kind of display questions, I think he might have invented the thing, was this Michael Long. He's famous for task-based learning. And one of the things he found, they did studies of going around English schools, mainstream schools, and what they found was that predominantly the teachers were just asking these display questions. And he would give examples also of like genuine questions which were made display. So he would kind of go, so, what does your father do? He's a teacher. Well done. Okay, what does your father do? He's a doctor. Excellent. What does your father do? He's dead. Great. What does your father do? He's unemployed, etc. So in essence, the question was it was genuine in a way, but was treated as a grammar exercise almost, and a correct or wrong response. And he was suggesting, his beliefs are that one of the ways that people learn a language is they do a task, and in their efforts to make this meaningful communication, there are moments when the communication breaks down, and at these moments are the moments of learning. Okay? So his suggestion was, if we're only asking these very kind of narrow display questions, then we're not having genuine communication, and we're not kind of involved in that meaning, and we're going to have fewer of these breakdowns of communication. Another way of looking at it is, I think I mentioned it on the first day, was this guy, John Hattie, who did this visible learning. Again, it's from mainstream education, so maths, biology, geography, these kinds of things. And he's did this meta-analysis of what worked in the classroom, and his kind of central premise was the idea of feedback. And as I mentioned before, this is not the feedback of saying, great job, from the teacher. It's not the teacher's evaluation of what the students got right or wrong. The important thing was the dialogue that happened, the genuine dialogue that happened between the teachers and students, where the teacher could see what the students know and what they don't know. So this is always a difficulty when we're teaching English. Some of the problem when we just use a course book, actually, is we have, I'm writing a course material. I have no idea about your students. I don't really know what level they are. They might know these words, they might not. How do we know? And obviously, we don't want to be teaching something which they all know already. And at the same time, we don't want to be kind of teaching something which is well above. If we talked about that Krashen I+1, we don't want to be teaching I+2, for example. Okay? So, this made me think about concept checking questions. So, in the next part here, we will be seeing some nonsense language. Okay? I have invented it. Okay? Just so you can experience for a moment how your students may be feeling. Okay? So here we go. Concept question number 1. Sa aino kursa inila say nothing. Am I talking about now, the past, or the future? Students, now, the past, or the future? Don't ask me. Now, past, or the future? Now. No. I nila say nothing. Past or the future? Yeah, past. No. I nila say future. I nila say nothing. It's the future. Very bad students. You failed. Okay. Okay, it's an exaggeration. Obviously, we're rarely in the situation where the students know nothing. But when I studied concept checking questions, it was in a time where we would have to create a big kind of context, which sometimes have pictures, act it out. We would then elicit the language from the students to express what we were trying to say, reformulate it in the particular grammar, and then ask these questions. So in a way, we were kind of eliciting the concept question in the state of the students knowing a lot. They've now changed them to concept checking questions. And this is the important thing to remember, that basically they rely on having a full context or an explanation or previous knowledge. You can't answer these questions correctly if you don't actually know the grammar already, strangely. They're checking, really. They're reminders rather than teaching tools. And certainly, in my experience of watching and doing CELTAs sometimes, what happened was the students sometimes, or the trainees, would go straight to these concept questions before the students they'd really explained the language they were supposed to be doing. You also need a concept. This is important when we come to vocabulary. So they're yes or no questions. They're future or the past, real or unreal. Okay, so there's a kind of duality, if you like, we can check. Okay. Any questions so far? Right? So, my idea would be, in kind of context of a teaching lexically, is these concept questions are not bad to learn how to do, but we have to bear in mind that they are checking something we've taught already. So where they may be useful for me, particularly, is sometimes actually when I'm doing a vocabulary task and we have other grammar there which I might want to draw attention to. So, for example, just with the person next to you, what grammar structures can you see? What concept question might you check the answer? Check the students kind of see why they're using it. For example, they've introduced a new system, okay? Did you notice, students? They've introduced. Yeah, have introduced. Present perfect. Yeah. Do we know when? No. Sometime before now. Great. Move on. okay? Or maybe, why do we say not they introduce a new system? Why do we say they've introduced? So I might give them the option and then follow up with this kind of concept question. So again, just in terms of a kind of more lexical approach, what I hope to show through this is that it's not that we're not teaching grammar. In fact, to my mind, we get more grammar when we teach lexically, because what we're doing is we're showing grammaticalized lexis rather than lexicalized grammar, as we say. And so we can revisit it. We might do a little kind of grammar focus on present perfect, but because we're showing how language is used constantly, we can also just draw attention to it briefly over and over again. And this is the way the students are going to acquire it more likely, okay? The other side, though, we need to bear in mind is how much feedback do you get from these questions? Essentially, the feedback you get is that they know the meaning of the rule or they don't. It doesn't actually tell us much more what they know of English. So this is my other concern about concept questions. So now let us apply concept checking questions to vocabulary. Okay, to schlock. Does this mean I eat and drink a lot or a little? Anybody? Yes, go. Yeah. Don't know, we don't know. Okay, anybody like to hazard a guess? Little? No, it's actually we drink a lot or eat a lot. Schlock, yeah. And does it mean I do it in a short time or a long time? Short time. Short time is correct. Well done. So what do you think the translation would be? What's the verb? Any suggestions? What do you think schlock means, actually? Devour. Any other suggestions? Swallow, possibly. Yeah. Any others? Sorry? Gobble up. Okay, yes. Gulp, gobble up, devour. Okay. I mean, all of these things could be possibilities. The actual word I was thinking of was binge. Do you know binge? So, you binge eat, you kind of starve yourself and then eat a lot. Anything else you could binge on? Binge watch TV, exactly. So you can have your box sets. Could you gobble up box sets? Could we gulp them, swallow them? Can we, sometimes we might gulp them or whatever, So devour a box set, perhaps. So the thing is, the concept question gets at some part of the meaning, but it doesn't really show us how this word is used. And actually, in many cases, the kind of closest synonyms will be all used in slightly different ways. Okay, the other problem perhaps here is obviously, as you pointed out, we just have the word, so there's no context, so it's impossible for the students to know. So we could do it, we could give them a bit more context, and we could do the same. I was driving too quickly, a policeman stopped me, I had to trad a crat. Did I give the policeman money? I did actually. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Okay. What's the meaning? Maybe we could add a little extra information. Trad a crat of €80. Play a fine. Okay, so we got closer to it here. But again, we could ask these questions. Does this mean I gave the policeman money? Did I give him the money? Does the policeman keep the money? I mean, we could imagine situations where in some cultures, perhaps the answer is yes, and it's still a fine, rather than a bribe, which is quite different, again. So, another alternative then would be to give, the problem is we haven't, again, if we follow the same idea, we haven't given an explanation yet, and they're concept checking questions, so this is how it would work. So go Hosky means to go on strike. We give the explanation, simple translation. I then ask, So, everybody, if you go hosky, are you happy or unhappy about your job? Do you go to work? Is it a holiday? No. Do I get paid? Do you want something about your job to change? Yes. Okay. Yeah. There's a certain kind of, yes, teacher. Yeah. You've just told me it's called go on strike. Why are you asking me these questions? The kind of deeper issue, though, is what feedback do we get about what the students know and what they don't know? The feedback we get is that they've heard our explanation and that they know, we can be fairly certain that they know that go hosky means to go on strike. But do they know how to use it? Okay, so here are some other potential concept questions. Okay, let us see what kind of feedback they give and if they work. So, have you ever gone hosky? Who's hosky now? No idea. Okay. Okay. Yellow vests. Okay, maybe. I think they do it the weekend, though, the yellow vests. I'm not sure they are hosky, actually. Okay, why might people go hosky? Any suggestions there? Sorry, yes? Because of dissatisfaction. Okay, any other suggestions? They're underpaid. Yes, they're underpaid. Not paid. Any other ones? Overworked. Yes, hours are too long. Any other suggestions? They want changes. What kind of changes? Something better. Okay, better working conditions, perhaps. Okay. What do you know? If you want to hosky, what do you have to do? What's the process? Gather a team. Yeah, so maybe you call a meeting, perhaps, yes. Who calls the meeting usually? Leader, yeah, or? Yeah, maybe the trade union, a union representative. And how does a hosky end? Jail. Oh dear. I'm not sure I want to live in your country, but there you go, yeah, okay. Any other suggestions? It depends. On what? Yeah, so. In a riot. Okay, you've all got a very terrible view of hoskies. Yes, they end badly. Maybe they end in success. Negotiations and successful negotiations. So, if we reflect on these 4 questions, we could describe them as concept-checking questions. Which ones provide more feedback? Which ones show us more? What do you think the students would say? So are they personalized? This is the question. So actually, the personalized ones, like this one, I mean, basically here, there was no response. Everybody just said no. It also doesn't actually, it doesn't check whether they understand hosky or not. It just means that all we can say is, we've no idea, they haven't. And similarly here, perhaps their experience or their knowledge of the world. I mean, actually the yellow vests one could lead to a kind of discussion which we could get more feedback. The point about these ones is that they're kind of stereotypes. We all know the kinds of things that happen in a hosky, even though we haven't experienced themselves. What the students would be saying are things like no money or bad money. I might say, this is feedback to me. They probably don't know the word. Yeah, they want a pay rise or they're badly paid. So that you're kind of encouraging them to recall language which they may have experienced and also see whether they know it or not. And then in their response, you will give them the English. So you're getting a bit more feedback. The other thing that happens, and this is where there's a kind of crossover between the display. I mean, obviously, I know what a hosky is and what normally happens. It's a display question all the same. But at the same time, students will often make unexpected things. I mean, like jail is the first one I've had. Okay, and that might then lead to a little bit of a discussion, which is not exactly, or yellow vests also maybe is kind of similar example, where we kind of actually enter a discussion which goes beyond a simple display. There was an interesting little slide in Gulnara's one about teachers' low expectations, the questions they ask to students. When they have low expectations of the students, they ask them simpler questions, kind of yes-no questions, if you like. And what I see these as are somewhat more demanding, that we're finding out more about the students, their background actually. They have a possibility of introducing that, even though we're talking about generalities. Okay? So these questions are slightly different. Certainly, I don't know what CELTA courses might do now, but certainly when I did my CELTA course and I learnt about concept checking questions, we were very much told, don't have the word in the question, make them yes-no questions, and for vocabulary, I think that's wrong. Because vocabulary in the end, they're not designed, I mean, basically the concept questions are not designed for vocabulary. They're designed for grammar. They're driven by grammar. They're yes-no concepts. Whereas actually the meaning of vocabulary and more importantly the usage of vocabulary is slippery. And what we want are questions which explore how the word is used, not simply the meaning. So going back to my principle yesterday, the meaning is the smallest part. We've given the meaning with the translation in this case. Go hosky means go on strike. Everybody's got the idea. It's very quickly over. We move on to exploring how the word is used by asking these more kind of divergent concept questions, if you like. Lots of the answers will be the same in every classroom, but there will be moments of, divergence, things which may come or go. So the principle then is include the keyword for vocabulary. Grammar is a bit different. I think we can stick with the kind of traditional style. But with the vocabulary ones, we include the keyword in the question, we might include the collocation in the question rather than a simple word. They're impersonal. This is important to remember. The personal questions are good, and we'll move on to them in a second. But when we're checking the language, where we're trying to find out what the students know and what they don't know and get feedback from them, we need to stick with these kind of prototypes, if you like, the might, because everybody has that experience of how that word works from their own language. And what we're exploring is the language, do they know it in English? And whether we can help them with that language in English. So we're exploring what it is to know the word. They're open, and they're generating this connected language. And there may be unexpected answers. And this is where they're not exactly display ones. They're providing the learning so that we can extend what the students know, not interestingly through synonyms, which we had there earlier, but actually exploring how this word works. So if you imagine a student, we'll be coming on to doing reading later, if they read a text about a strike in the newspaper or they hear it on the news, what other language do you think they will hear? Probably they will be talking about why they're on strike, for better pay or for worse conditions or for better conditions, etc. Maybe at what stage it's at, whether they're in negotiations, etc. So the language we're exploring will be kind of helping them to process text and listening and things like this. So, a moment of thought. Here are some kind of these types of concept questions. in the first instance, just with a partner, think of the answers yourselves, but also think what aspect of word knowledge, what is aspect of the word are we exploring? I'm going to do, so for example, what do people do if they are angry? Yell, yeah. Scream and shout. Swear sometimes, yes. Sadly, in my house, a lot of that. Yeah. Sometimes fight, yeah. Break things, yeah. Smash stuff. Slam doors, okay. Often in my house, actually, stop talking to me. Silent treatment, that kind of thing. So, again, what this is to do with the kind of context again. It's like exploring the kinds of language which may occur if we were talking about somebody, explaining why somebody was really angry and what happened. What kinds of vehicle? You're looking at kind of lexical sets. What might you ask if it's boiling in the room? Answer would be, can you turn on the air conditioning? Can you open the window? It's kind of looking at the pragmatics of this. So usually when people say, God, it's boiling in here, they're really asking a question. And if we think about how the conversation works, that's the answer that we might need. Preposition, okay, we can ask these kind of more narrow, they don't all have to be divergent. We could look at the grammar of certain words. Other things you binge on is basically looking at collocation. So you binge on box sets, whatever. Opposites, we tend to look at opposites in terms of single words, heavy, light, etc. But actually, very rarely, as we saw yesterday, the opposite is exactly, when you have it as a collocation, they're often differing. So we're trying to look at opposites of combinations of words, at least a collocation, or, rather than phrase. So, for example, the opposite of leave halfway through might be? Stay till the end. Yeah, or stay till the bitter end sometimes, okay? Maybe left straight away, perhaps, could be the possibility. And again, if you think about how the conversation works, did you stay till the end? No, I left halfway through. So you can see how they might function within a conversation. The last one is a synonym one. As I mentioned yesterday, my preference is to avoid these kinds of questions, tempting though they are. Where I might, this is when I'm in a context of academic English, sometimes I might ask for at least asking for an easier way to say it, because one presumes that the easier way is the thing they know already, rather than trying to get into new ways of saying things. Here is the first few, okay? It doesn't have to be the word in bold if you want to do system or introduce or whatever, but, can you think of some concept-checking questions like we've just seen about training, struggling, modules, workshop, practical, keen, etc.? You can see if you agree on any of them. They're not, again, then there's no right or wrong answer. So why might a company provide training for their staff? So sometimes what you might find is it's helpful to give a little extra context to the key word. What's the opposite of I'm struggling? One would expect the students should know I'm doing well. Okay? If they can't do that, then this is feedback to us that they're struggling, actually, probably. Why might someone struggle at work? So maybe giving a new context, because actually the things you struggle with in a course will be different to the things you struggle with at work, often. And so there may be different language comes up there, so we can explore different contexts. You get the idea. Okay, what I would say is, just as my planning these days for classes mainly consists of what we did this morning, which is basically looking at speaking tasks, thinking of things the students might say, cheating, if you prefer, and the kinds of things I might focus on in feedback, and writing questions about the vocabulary that I'm going to teach. Because they're not, it takes a while to get used to writing the questions. They're quite difficult for me, I've been doing it quite a long time, but I often can't think of a good question to ask in that moment. So very often, I need to write them down and think about them beforehand. And sometimes they're not always successful either. So, Okay? Obviously, we then might want to practice, and I'll just give a very brief comment on this, which is, often I will be asking varied questions about the vocabulary. Particularly when it comes to texts, which we're going on to in a moment. Sometimes the vocabulary could be varied. It's not particularly about one topic. But I ask different questions. These are just invented based on the original ones we had before. But the point is I would ask a few of these, and again, this might be an extra thing I would do in my planning. And I don't expect the students to be able to answer all the questions. I give them a range of different ways of thinking about them, and they answer the ones they can. And I'm listening to them. I think about what I would answer to these questions. I listen to what the students say. I write up whole sentences. I gap them. I ask that. And then that might lead to another conversation. And, I can occasionally carry on like that for the whole class and never return to the course book. But, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Okay? Just a kind of brief thing is, do you know anyone? Do you know anywhere? Is often a better question than have you ever? Just because it allows the students to answer from somebody else's point of view if they've not had that experience. Obviously, they can answer about themselves. Yes, I do know somebody. I did it. So it kind of gives a kind of a little one. So again, we can include the questions even though the students might not use that word in the practice, if you like. But we need to be prepared to teach some of the surrounding language, some of the answers that they give. So think about it beforehand. You need to frame the students' questions around their experience. So this is why have you ever Hosky would be no good for anybody under the age of 30, probably. Allow this reference for someone else, not just me. Variety of questions about variety of questions, vocab. And just don't expect all the questions to be answered. It doesn't matter. Really doesn't. As long as the students can find some responses to some of the questions, they will find their route through it. Okay. That is my thoughts on questions for the moment. So the question is, do I experience that the students don't know how to ask questions?
Yeah, and how do you help them?
And how do I help them? So, yes, I have experienced this. Most typically, when I was interviewing students for placement tests at the university. And I would ask them things like, how long have you been working for the government? We had a lot of students coming from the Chinese government, for example. And they would kind of go, and they would kind of look at me, and they just weren't familiar with just common questions. My feeling, the reason for that is because they're just never taught, because we have a grammar-focused syllabus. And, for example, what do you do? Typically, it's taught at elementary or beginner, but in the unit on B. So the question is actually, what's your job? And so once we've done jobs, we carry on through our units and we never return to it. So the students never get to hear the normal question is, what do you do? Things like that happen because we're focused more on the grammar than or the single words or word sets than the conversations. So one of the things I'm trying to do in the example we had at the beginning is if we are going to talk about a topic, well, what are the questions I would want to know if you were doing a course? What are the kinds of things I would ask? I mean, at a lower level, I might just focus on how's it going? And think about the typical answers to these questions. So that's the other side, I think, sometimes. If you take present perfect, if we're focused on the grammar of present perfect, the questions and practice will be things like, have you ever been to Ukraine? But then it will be, have you ever slept in a cave? Have you ever ridden a horse? Have you ever tried sushi? And we have a whole list of different verb forms. Whereas, as I said, the most common present perfect question is, have you ever been? What are the answers to those questions? No, but I'd love to. No, but it's supposed to be great. No, but I'm thinking of going there this afternoon. I'm going there later, actually. Would you like to come? And actually, we would be better kind of focused on the being and the ways we use that question and the way we reply to it and the way we develop that conversation than having lots of examples of present perfect. So those two aspects, I think, is the way I would approach it. The last thing is, as I say, I think once you start asking these questions, students also start asking you these kinds of questions. And they kind of, if we can then give them answers to those and support them, that also encourages further questions. So we're developing this kind of feedback dialogue between the teachers and students. So that's the thing about questions. What we're going to look at in the second part now is teaching reading, lexically, more or less. Very briefly, my experience of this, again, slightly changed from my SUTO course. I used to teach, typically skimming, scanning, different skills, this kind of approach. But over time, it's been eroded my faith in these things. It started by teaching SUTO courses. I would send students off to watch classes, and my instructions would be, what did the students learn in the class? And very often, the trainees would come back with this. Occasionally, they would say, oh, they definitely learned the word orangutan, or twig, or rotting buffalo, prairie, things like this. And I thought, oh gosh, what's happening here? I think what was happening was the teachers were teaching reading skills. I was in a university, so academic skills were a kind of important part of the teaching. But I started worrying and thinking that perhaps my trainees were right, that actually the students were learning nothing. Or maybe only learning twig or orangutan, which is possibly worse. Okay, so in my conference-going ways, I then came across various other things. So I went to this conference talk at IH, met a guy called Philip Kerr, and he basically said, kind of reaffirmed my feelings, skills, yada yada. Basically, the best readers were the best language knowers, was his phrase. They know more vocabulary when it comes down to it. Then I read a book by James Charles Alderson. It's in the Cambridge Assessment series, teaching reading, assessing reading. And he kind of had this thing, basically skills and strategies, like basically testing whether students can skim well or scan well or infer well or etc., was actually very hard to do, to distinguish the reading that was taking place. And then if we can't test those things, I started wondering, well, can we teach them? And on another side of that, is predicting, for example, for one text, actually help you to process a text which is completely different? So these things started to worry. Then I read this thing about the 97% of words, which we mentioned yesterday. Students can't guess the words if they don't know 97%. Then I went to a talk and somebody said that basically extensive reading, yeah, great, but actually as a way of learning vocabulary, very inefficient. Dear, this isn't going well, okay? So then I read an article about Catherine Walter. She kind of gave this example of bottom-up processing. So rather than this top-down predicting, thinking, imagining what went before, she was saying that actually students who can't pronounce well actually can struggle with reading. The reason being that when we read, we kind of have an internal voice in our head. And to remember, we have to kind of read that little section. We have to keep that in memory in order to then connect it to the next bit of reading. Okay? You've probably had that experience where you read a bit and then you realize you've forgotten completely what's just gone before and you have to go back and reread it, etc. And what she says is it works in what's called the phonological loop. So basically it's stored in this short-term memory, and that relies on being able to pronounce the words quite well. So if you can't, it's more difficult to remember what we've just read. Which makes reading aloud interesting. Because again, I was always told never read aloud, ever, because we never do it on my SUTO. Okay, and then the last one, again, William Grabe, he did a thing on reading skills. He's quite a well-known academic, kind of leading academic in reading in a second language. And if you read his book, again, he kind of questions the skills and strategies model. He suggests that it could work, but it has to be very consistent in the way it's done, and it has to be done over a long period of time in this consistent way. And for many of us, that's just not possible. And what he emphasized was what he describes as automaticity, which is basically the ability to decode, recognize words and phrases and groups of words very quickly, which allows us to read. And he has various ideas of one way of developing this automaticity is to reread a text 10 times. I thought of this yesterday when Vitaly was saying that he'd listened to, the Goblet of Fire or whatever it is, 18 times. But maybe there's something in that. So we have this we've developed this thing of pre-reading, reading for gist, reading for detailed information, maybe some post-reading task. So basically we typically read a thing twice. Perhaps we could increase this. So it's not that we shouldn't bother with these kind of pre-reading and different modes, but perhaps for different reasons. So, for example, the pre-reading discussion, for me, is a discussion, and I treat it in the same way as I treated the speaking task that we had this morning. So I listen to the students. They're saying something wrong. It's wrong. The fact is that the idea may be the correct thing, which I know is in the text, and they may have value, but the thing which will help them get better readers is knowing the correct language to help them to read it. So I would be correcting and putting examples on the board, maybe language that they will see in the text. So what we're going to do is a kind of little reading task. And sorry, yes, for yeah, for my friends from Azerbaijan, they've seen this already. Sorry. So here we go. You need a piece of paper. I'm going to read out some short phrases from the text. Okay? I will read them fast, or fast, if you prefer. And you should write them down. You won't be able to write down everything, though, probably. Okay? Ready? I'm only going to say them once as well. Okay, everybody ready? Challenge. Okay. A report revealed they apparently have. A lot of this work is seen as, it seems many teachers, another form filling. That this meant teachers, the result of this, and leave the profession. When I go to my son's school, there's a steady turnover. Probably down to the fact they're often seen as. Okay? So, just with the person next to you, what did you get? Can you reconstruct any of them, if you think? Okay, I'll be generous. I'll read it one more time, okay? Okay, ready? Here we go. A report revealed they apparently have. A lot of this work is seen as, it seems many teachers, another form filling. That this meant teachers, the result of this, and leave the profession. When I go to my son's school, there's a steady turnover. Probably down to the fact they're often seen as. Okay? Again, just check with the person next to you what you got. Okay, again, just stop for a moment. So did anybody have anything different? Yeah, so tell me what was different that you had? Oh yeah, so we had fill in instead of filling. Like feeling. Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, it's quite common because if you have, it's feeling and filling. It's a E. And then I might actually get the students to, it's also like this. Look, E. Tongues further back. Yeah, and this is filling. Yeah. Any other differences you had? Yeah, so sometimes you might have had another. So you might have had another form filling. Yes, so often you get this, and often we don't really hear this. People kind of stop it. It's a glottal stop. Another form filling, another form filling, another form filling. Okay, so you get the idea. So what I would look at is other similar mishearings. Well, they're not mishearings, actually. They are correct hearings. So I actually did say pretty much another. It's just that the reality is that that goes with and other. So what we're showing the students is what they're hearing and how it can be changed in connected speech and fast speech. So it's kind of working around this kind of idea of the phonological packet that phrases come in. Okay? So that's the first thing. Then I would say, what I'd like you to do is using these phrases as best you can. Okay, obviously at this stage we might also just check any ones they're not sure of. We don't need to do that. Just have a quick go. Can you say what the text is about? Try and use. So, for example, a report revealed. What do you think? That many teachers leave the profession. Any other suggestions? That teachers work a lot. Are burnt out. Okay, that teachers are burnt out. Okay, Couple of possibilities. They apparently have. They apparently have a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy. Okay. Any other suggestions? They apparently have. Pardon? A lot of paperwork. Yeah. Okay. Similar kind of thing. So, in the same way, can you say what the other ones might say about the text? Off you go with the person next to you. Let's go. There we go. That's the better one. So, just read and see if you were right. Which things were different from what you guessed? Off you go. I'll give you a little read. So, with your partner next to you, can you remember what they said this time? A report revealed what? Teachers work 58 hours a week. Okay. They apparently have a lot of workload. Okay, yeah, maybe. Heaviest workload. Okay, etc. A lot of this work is seen as a waste of time. We can all remember that. Okay. So again, with the person next to you, what do you remember using the phrases in the same way? Go. Okay, stop. Again, we're going a little bit quicker than I would normally go. But just read again, just to check. Was there anything you forgot? So just read and just tell me afterwards which things you forgot. Okay, so read and just quickly again, see which things you forgot. Was there anything, tell me, anybody that you forgot anything? What was it? What was the thing you forgot? Okay, teachers are often held in low esteem. So, you know, if they're held in, so obviously you know what it means, but in the class I'd go, yeah, so if teachers are held in low esteem, people don't like them. They think they're at a bad level in society. Okay, they're held in low esteem. Anybody else forgot anything? Slavery, yes, yeah, work slavery. Any other things you missed? Okay, you would go through that process. So the students might tell you a couple of things they'd forgotten. Okay. So the connection again, if the kind of principles that we had already, in terms of lexical approach, if you like, is, I mean, I'm sure that you probably do something similar in kind of giving words and guessing the kind of, predicting the content of the class. The only difference here is that we're using phrases. So we're looking at collocations, could be called colligations, phrases, and they're not actually all just simple collocations. In a way, we could see these as the grammar of the text. They're often, a lot of them, like a result of this, are really, they're not content stuff, but they kind of frame how the text works, okay? And actually probably allowed you to say, to predict actually quite well what came next, okay? We've already had 2 reads, but you could also say 2.5 because we've also, in these phrases, we've read those a couple of times, and they're probably 20% of the text. Okay, so there's a kind of already a certain repetition and automaticity of these kinds of things. One of the things I like, maybe, I mean, I used to do them always with these simple collocations, but actually things like are probably down to the facts. Are these kinds of common, very, very common phrases which will occur in these types of texts. And perhaps, again, because they're not content words exactly, they're not lexical sets, we kind of pass over them. And so this is encouraging the students to see these words again. After that, I might do the comprehension tasks which are in the book, where I might, obviously as a writer myself, I might write them myself. This would be the 3rd read. Just in terms of the comprehension questions, most of the ones we get in course material are of this kind of factual I would say more display type questions. Are UK teachers the busiest in the world? Answer, true or false? Yeah, false. Yes, because who's busier? Japan and Alberta in Canada. Why Alberta? I'm not sure. UK teachers often not improving. Yes, true. Yeah. Don't have time for professional development. So again, just one thing that we can do here is, I didn't do it here actually, I just repeated it, but we could ask the students, say, yes, that's right, what did they actually say? And this might get them to re-look at the text to check their answer. Very often, students, again, because it's a memory thing, they remember the basic idea, but they're not remembering the actual language. And it's the actual language which we need the students to remember. Okay? So it's getting them to do it. The other way to think about it is maybe we could ask a few more what might be described as critical thinking questions, or ones which are perhaps open to interpretation. So, why does the writer talk about Alberta in Canada? Because they're an example of teachers who work even more than English teachers. So they're kind of examples of these. Why does he mention the politicians and media? Yeah, so they're kind of creating this kind of vision of teachers, which they're moaning. Perhaps more interesting ones are, what's the evidence he gives to support that teachers are getting burnt out? Yeah, it's the high staff turnover. So it's like the fact that all these teachers are under 30. Do you think that's good evidence? I mean, if we wanted to go further, we could question whether that is good evidence. Is it really? Is this proof? It's just his example in his son's school. What about in every other school? So it could give us an opportunity to discuss the kind of global citizen thing we were talking about in the discussion the other side. So, yes, we could ask a kind of what reasons does the author give, but then follow it up with a kind of more open question about which is more important. So there's a certain kind of ambiguity. We're not just always doing these simple kind of yes-no comprehension questions. Okay, so this would be 3.5 readings we've had. Obviously, the students have to re-look at it. They might have to re-look at it in the feedback. So we could say, let's call it 4 altogether. I want to talk about exchanging thoughts and feelings, experiences of everyday life in your country, deepening knowledge of culture. These were principles that we had about teaching, and we were talked about in the break, before the break, about global citizens. So 3 tasks I like. The first 2 are the most easy to prepare for the busy teacher. Okay? Choose 2 things you find surprising or don't believe. Choose 2 things that are different in your country. Choose 2 things that you thought were interesting. Choose 2 things that you thought were stupid. You decide on that category. The students read through and pick out those things. It's a comprehension task, but then they're in pairs and they discuss them. Tick anything that's the same in your country, cross anything that's different, question mark anything you want to talk about. So let's go for the choose 2 things in this case. I usually do the next one. Choose 2 things which you think are different in your country. Just have a quick read through again. 2 things which you think are different in Ukraine or wherever you're from, Georgia. Okay, and stop there. You get the idea. Again, they have to reread to make their choices, but it's leading to a kind of personalized discussion practice. I then might do some language work. As a lexical teacher, I do language work on lexis more often than I do it on grammar, kind of. Again, the typical thing might be match these words with meaning, you know, maybe. Here's the words which I think are difficult. Here are the, or I think are definitely new, and here is the meanings, match them together. That's okay to a point, but what I'm interested in is how they use these words. So one idea is to take the key word that you want to look at. Firstly, actually, I'm more concerned with frequent words. That might include words I think the students know already. But I want to explore how well they know these words. So how they're used. So in this case, rather than gapping the key word, I gap words around the key word. So we're exploring what they know about the grammar, in sense the colligation which goes with these words. So for example, number one would be, on average, British teachers work 58 hours a week. And then as I go through, I'm like, yeah, they work 58 hours a week. They work 200 hours a month, you know, 1,200 hours a year, whatever it is. British teachers have the heaviest students, the heaviest workload. Read again. Check your answers. So again, I would normally do this first. I would obviously have more than 3 examples. I would give them, say, 8 or 6, where I don't expect them to be able to answer it well, but then I say, okay, read again and check your answers. So they'll skim through it and find those words, and it's another read. 5.5 so far. Different one might be, what's the colloquat that's missing? In the first one, any idea? Do, have a lot of, create? No? Yeah. Has revealed, shown that, highlighted. Report, yeah. Improve your, assess a strong professional development? No, it doesn't work, yeah. Strong career, assess my career. Okay, again, what we would have to do is look back. It's performance is the missing word. But what we would do is get the students, it's the same process. We would see how many they could get from memory, and then just look back and see if they can find the words.
How much time do you give them? Because it may take them really long
to find the words.
Yeah.
See how they do, give them a couple of minutes, 3 minutes to scan through. And if they don't have it, I just go through the answers and I give them the answers. So it doesn't have to be a thing. And I might, as I'm going through the answers, asking some of those questions which we had just before, earlier in the session. So then they would look through. So last one, two further final kind of exercises, very quickly. Yeah, I have 5 minutes, I think I can squeeze in. In pairs, who can find 8 adjective noun collocations? So an adjective noun collocations, for example, average, no, on average, no, that's on average, no, you see. Heaviest workload, there's one. Can you find 7 more? In pairs, first one to finish, lift your hand, okay, off you go. Okay, the front, okay, and then, okay, obviously then I would ask the students to read out the ones we've already beaten. They've beaten you, I'm afraid, already at the front here. Bad luck, you know, good try, you know. So we would check their answers or show them on the board. We don't have them, I forgot to highlight them. Did I? There they are, yeah. Okay, and you would get them to read through and just to check again, perhaps? Or just give them the answers and tell them. At that point, I might write some questions. So we've had one discussion, but I might also either or have a discussion about vocabulary which is in the text. So one thing about making, sometimes texts are boring, students aren't interested in them, but one way we can motivate them and find interest is writing some questions based on aspects of the text or words in the text. So rather than having, their ideas about teaching, we might ask, what profession do you think has the biggest workload? And kind of expand it out on those kind of ways. Okay, very last thing then. We've had 7, I think, reads already. Have you got your mobile phones? Please take them out. Mobile phone. You're going to record yourself. So you need a recorder version on your phone. Everybody ready? Okay. So what I'd like you to do is read the text as fast as you can, record yourself, first person to finish, lift your hand. Okay? Right, no starting. Ready? Yeah. Ready? Steady? Go. Attention, man. Oh, we have a winner. There you go. So our winner is here at the front. What was your time? 41 seconds. I'm afraid in the last group I did this in, the record was 33.01 seconds. So, you're good, but not quite good enough yet. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, I don't normally listen to these recordings. The purpose of the recording is simply to make sure the students do it and that they have a time at the end of it to compare. Because what I might ask them to do then a following day, just as a warmer, see if you can beat your time. And this would be the 9th reading. Yeah? So you can see actually it's reading aloud, and there is a kind of thing about fast reading is a sign of, improving your speed of reading helps you to be a better reader. I guess partly because if you can read quickly, then it's easier to remember a larger chunk in our phonological loop, perhaps. Perhaps that's the reason. Okay? Okay, so the question is, what do you do with the student who kind of says, I can't understand anything, What I would hope is, I think sometimes this happens when we go straight with comprehension questions, actually. It's particularly an issue with listening, I think, actually, but with reading as well. So you have the comprehension question. It's a kind of yes-no answer. The 2 exercises we did first, actually, there's no pressure. There's not a right or wrong answer as such. All you're doing is saying, what you remembered, was it the same or different? To some degree, some of the students might not still fully understand the text, but when they come to do the comprehension questions, it's the 3rd time they're looking at it. So it may be that they're better able to then process and answer some of those questions. Obviously, there will still be students who can't. And then as we're going through the answers, we're checking meaning and kind of drawing attention to that language and re-explaining it. Not for just the student who got the wrong answer. This is the other reason, yes, you're right. What was the actual phrase? We're encouraging the students, even when they're right, often they can't remember exactly. They have to look back. And that can give us also an opportunity to re-explain that language for the whole class, including the students who didn't understand. And then they're getting 1 or 2 more goes at reading, which means now they have a better understanding of the text, but they're also having that opportunity to read a bit quicker. So the reading aloud is good, but it needs to come at the end. If we start with the reading aloud, then the students stop listening. They just see it as, I'm reading this little bit, that's the task, and they ignore what the others are reading, etc., and they're not actually processing it in any kind of way. So the reading aloud, I think, is a good value, but it comes later. You could take the recording and actually check as well, if you want to. Yes.
Thank you very much. A round of applause.